I'm 73 years old. My name is Harold, and I'm sitting here in this empty house that cost me everything to build and nothing to fill with love. The silence is deafening now, not the peaceful kind of silence I thought wealth would bring me, but the hollow echo of a life spent chasing numbers on a bank statement while my soul slowly starved. How do you measure a life well lived? By the size of your portfolio, the zeros in your checking account, or by something deeper, something I ignored for so many years? I remember the exact moment when the pursuit of money became my god. I was 25, just married to Sarah, holding our first mortgage papers. The weight of that debt terrified me. I promised myself I'd work hard just until we were comfortable, just until we were secure. But comfortable became more comfortable. Security became accumulation, and somewhere along the way I stopped seeing money as a tool and started worshipping it as my savior. The hours got longer, the deals got bigger. Sarah would wait up for me with dinner growing cold on the table, her eyes pleading for just a few minutes of my attention. But there was always another client to call, another investment to research, another opportunity to chase. I convinced myself I was doing it all for her, for our future children, but really I was feeding an addiction, an insatiable hunger for more. Our first child, Emily, was born on a Tuesday. I missed it. I was in Chicago closing a real estate deal that would net us 6 figures. Sarah never said a word when I walked into the hospital room 12 hours later, but I saw something die in her eyes that day, something I didn't even recognize I'd killed until it was too late. I thought providing meant presence. I thought money equaled love. When Emily needed help with homework, I hired tutors. When she wanted to play catch, I bought her the most expensive glove money could buy. When she graduated high school as valedictorian, I wasn't there, but I did wire enough money for a celebration party that made the local newspaper. By my 40s, I had achieved everything I thought I wanted. Multiple properties, a portfolio worth millions, cars that turned heads, and vacations to places most people only dream about. But Sarah had grown distant, and Emily barely spoke to me anymore. I told myself it was teenage rebellion. I told myself they'd understand when they were older. I told myself a lot of lies in those days. The spiritual side of life, that was for weak people. People who couldn't handle reality. People who needed fairy tales to cope with the harshness of existence. I had my faith in compound interest and market analysis. I prayed to profit margins and found my meaning in quarterly statements. When people talked about God or purpose or the deeper questions of existence, I'd nod politely and mentally calculate how much money I was losing by sitting through such nonsense. Sarah started going to church when Emily was 16. She asked me to come. Once, I laughed, not cruelly but dismissively. "Honey, I've got 3 conference calls and a property viewing tomorrow morning. Someone has to keep the lights on." She never asked again, and if I'm being honest, I was relieved. All that singing and praying and talking about invisible things felt like a waste of precious time that could be spent building our empire. I remember scoffing at my brother David when he told me he'd found peace through faith after his divorce. "Peace doesn't pay the bills, David," I said. "God doesn't make your mortgage payments." The irony wasn't lost on him, though it was completely lost on me at the time. He was going through one of the darkest periods of his life, and he'd found something that actually helped. And I mocked it. The turning point came when I was 68. Sarah had been fighting breast cancer for 2 years. 2 years of treatments and hope and fear, and watching the strongest woman I'd ever known grow fragile before my eyes. I threw money at the problem like I threw money at everything. The best doctors, the most expensive treatments, private rooms, experimental therapies. Money was my weapon against death itself. But cancer doesn't care about your net worth. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath, in that sterile, expensive hospital room surrounded by machines that cost more than most people's houses. I realized something that shattered everything I thought I knew. All the money in the world, all the success, all the accumulation, all the years of sacrifice, and I couldn't buy one more day with the woman I loved. I couldn't purchase one more conversation, one more laugh, one more chance to say the things I should have said decades ago. I'd spent 50 years building a fortune and lost the only treasure that actually mattered. The grief hit me like a physical blow. Not just sadness, but a deep, existential terror. I was alone in a way that money couldn't fix. The house felt like a mausoleum. The cars sat unused in the garage. The bank statements arrived like mockery in the mail. Emily came to the funeral, but she was a stranger to me. This beautiful, accomplished woman who was my daughter, but barely knew who I was beyond the checks I'd written, and the opportunities I'd provided. For the first time in my adult life, I had a question that market research couldn't answer. What was the point of any of it? I started having panic attacks, real ones, the kind where you think you're dying, and you realize that death might actually be a relief from the crushing weight of a wasted life. I'd sit in my study, surrounded by awards and trophies and financial statements, and I couldn't breathe. The silence of that big empty house was suffocating. That's when God found me. Not through some dramatic revelation or burning bush, but through the simple, persistent voice of my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She was 82, a widow who lived in a tiny apartment and survived on Social Security. But every morning when I'd check my mailbox in my robe and slippers, feeling sorry for myself, she'd be out watering her small garden, humming hymns and radiating a kind of peace I'd never seen before. One particularly dark morning, about 6 months after Sarah's funeral, I was standing on my porch feeling completely lost when Mrs. Patterson called out, "Harold, you look like you could use a cup of coffee and some company." Something in her voice, not pity, just genuine care, broke something open inside me. I found myself sitting in her tiny kitchen, surrounded by photos of grandchildren and hand-stitched Bible verses, crying like a child. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. She just listened while I told her about Sarah, about Emily, about the crushing realization that I'd spent my entire life climbing the wrong mountain. When I finally stopped talking, she said something that changed everything. "Harold, God's been waiting for this conversation for a long time." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her about all the religious people I'd known who seemed hypocritical or weak, but I was too broken to argue, too empty to resist. So I just sat there while she told me about a God who loved people, even when they'd wasted decades chasing the wrong things, a God who specialized in second chances and new beginnings, a God who could bring meaning to even the most misdirected life. Don't forget to give this video a like if it's resonating with you so far. Over the following weeks I found myself visiting Mrs. Patterson more and more often. She introduced me to her pastor, a gentleman named Robert who didn't judge my wealth or my mistakes but simply welcomed me as someone seeking truth. For the first time in decades, I sat in a church pew. For the first time in my life, I listened, really listened, to ideas that had nothing to do with profit or loss. It wasn't immediate. I didn't have some road to Damascus moment where everything suddenly made sense. But slowly, gradually, like dawn breaking after the longest night, I began to understand what I'd been missing. There was a dimension to existence that had nothing to do with material success. There was a purpose that transcended earthly accumulation. There was a peace that couldn't be purchased or earned but only received. I started reading the Bible, not as literature or historical curiosity, but as someone desperately searching for meaning. The words seemed to jump off the page, stories of people who had lost everything and found God, tales of transformation and redemption and hope beyond circumstances. I began to understand that my crisis of meaning wasn't unique. It was the universal human condition of trying to satisfy spiritual hunger with material food. Prayer became real for me. Not the desperate bargaining I'd done in the hospital while Sarah was dying, but actual communication with something larger than myself. I started each morning sitting in that same chair where I used to check stock prices, instead asking God to show me how to live the rest of my life with purpose. The changes weren't dramatic from the outside, but they were revolutionary from within. I began reaching out to Emily, not with offers of money or solutions to problems she hadn't asked me to solve, but with simple expressions of love and regret. I started volunteering at the local food bank, discovering the strange joy of serving others without any expectation of return. I found myself caring less about what my investments were doing, and more about what God was doing in my heart. Maybe most importantly, I learned to forgive myself. Pastor Robert helped me understand that guilt and regret, while natural, could become prisons that kept me from the life God still wanted me to live. Yes, I'd made terrible choices. Yes, I'd wasted decades. But God wasn't finished with me yet. I still had time to love well, to serve others, to find the meaning that had eluded me for so long. Emily and I started having real conversations for the first time since she was a little girl. I apologized, not just for missing her childhood, but for modeling such a distorted set of priorities. To my amazement, she forgave me. We began building a relationship based on something deeper than financial support. I got to know my grandchildren not as beneficiaries of my wealth, but as unique souls deserving of my time and attention. I started giving money away, not for tax purposes or recognition, but because I finally understood that it was just a tool, and tools are meant to be used, not hoarded. Scholarship funds for kids who couldn't afford college, anonymous payments for families struggling with medical bills, support for local ministries feeding the hungry and housing the homeless. Each donation felt like freedom, like breaking chains I'd worn for so long, I'd forgotten they were there. Now, let me share with you the insights that came too late for me to fully live by, but maybe not too late for you. First, success without relationship is just elaborate loneliness. I achieved everything the world told me to want and found myself completely isolated from everyone I should have loved. Money can buy you a lot of things, but it can't buy you back the moments you missed or the people you neglected. Second, security is an illusion that becomes an addiction. No amount of money ever feels like enough. Because financial security can't address spiritual insecurity, I spent decades trying to build walls of wealth around my life, but anxiety and fear found their way through every crack. True security comes from knowing you're loved by God regardless of your circumstances. Third, purpose can't be purchased. I thought meaning would naturally follow success. But achievement without service to something larger than yourself is just self-indulgence. Real purpose comes from understanding your role in God's larger story, not from accumulating resources for your own comfort. Fourth, time is the only irreplaceable currency. I spent money freely but hoarded time like a miser, always believing there would be more later. There's always another opportunity to make money, but you can't earn back a single moment with the people you love. Every minute you spend chasing material success, instead of nurturing relationships, is gone forever. Finally, God is patient, but life is short. I discovered divine love and purpose at 73, but I wish I'd found it at 23, or 33, or even 53. God waited for me all those years, but how much more life I could have lived if I'd recognized his presence sooner. How many more meaningful moments I could have had with Sarah, with Emily, with everyone whose lives I touched. These realizations didn't come as abstract theological concepts, but as lived truths that changed everything about how I approached each day. When you understand that you're loved unconditionally by the creator of the universe, when you realize that your worth has nothing to do with your net worth, when you grasp that you were made for relationship and service rather than accumulation and achievement, everything shifts. I want to speak to you now with all the tenderness I wished someone had shown me when I was younger and thought I had all the answers. Maybe you're where I was, successful by worldly standards, but empty in ways you can't quite name. Maybe you're chasing security through accumulation, believing that just a little more will finally be enough. Maybe you've been so busy building your earthly kingdom that you've ignored the invitation to participate in an eternal one. Please consider the possibility that there's more to existence than what you can see and measure and control. Consider that the restlessness in your soul might be God calling you to something greater than material success. Consider that the meaning you're searching for can't be earned or purchased, but only received as a gift from someone who loves you more than you can imagine. I'm not asking you to abandon responsibility, or stop working, or give away everything you own. I'm simply inviting you to consider that Jesus Christ offers something money can't buy: real peace, lasting purpose, and unconditional love. He offers forgiveness for the mistakes you've made, and hope for the life you still have left to live. If you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, you'll hear more stories like mine, stories of people who found meaning beyond material success. This isn't about joining a religion or following a set of rules. It's about accepting the love of Jesus Christ and allowing him to transform your priorities and your heart. It's about surrendering the exhausting burden of being your own savior and trusting in someone who actually has the power to save. You don't have to wait until you're 73 and alone in an empty house to discover what really matters. You don't have to lose everything you thought was important to find the one thing that actually is important. God is calling you today, right now, wherever you are in your success or failure, your wealth or poverty, your confidence or confusion. The prayer that changed my life was simple: Jesus, I've been trying to find meaning in all the wrong places. I surrender my life to you. Please show me how to live for something greater than myself. If those words resonate with your heart, I encourage you to pray them yourself, not because I'm trying to convert you, but because I want you to experience the peace and purpose I found too late to fully enjoy. My story doesn't have a happy ending in the conventional sense. Sarah is still gone. Decades of missed opportunities with Emily can't be recovered. The money I spent my life accumulating feels meaningless now. But my story does have hope. The hope that comes from knowing God's love, from understanding true purpose, from living with eternal perspective. And your story can have both meaning and time to live it fully. I've learned that God doesn't waste anything. Not even wasted years. He can take the broken pieces of a misdirected life and create something beautiful. He can give you peace in the present and hope for the future. He can show you how to love well and live with purpose, regardless of how much time you have left. The choice is yours. You can continue chasing after things that will ultimately disappoint, or you can accept the love of Jesus Christ and discover what your heart has been searching for all along. You can keep trying to earn your worth through achievement, or you can rest in the worth God has already given you. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until it's almost too late to discover what really matters. God is calling you today. Jesus Christ is offering you peace, purpose, and eternal love. The invitation is simple. Accept him as your Lord and Savior. Trust him with your life. Allow him to show you the meaning you've been seeking and the love you've been craving. If this message touched your heart today, I'd be honored if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below about your own journey toward meaning and purpose. Like this video if it encouraged you, and subscribe to this channel for more honest conversations about faith and life. Remember, it's never too late to start living for what really matters, but it's also never too early. Thank you for listening to an old man's reflections on a life that found its meaning just in time.